continuity. And you've all heard the phrase "Inna al-Deen Muhammadiyul Wujud, Husayniyul Baqa," that the Islamic religion has started with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and then continued by Al-Husayn alayhi salam. And many people would think that, how does that make sense? Because the Prophet brought on the religion, so that part is okay. But how is the Hussein a continuation of, let's say, the religion of Islam? He didn't bring anything new, and if he did, then that is a problem, because we say, as the narrations say, حلال محمد حلال إلى يوم القيامة وحرامه حرام إلى يوم القيامة. What Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us, that it is lawful, it will be lawful until the end of time. And what he told us, that it is unlawful and haram, then it is unlawful and haram also till the end of time. So what did Al-Hussein do? What such very significant achievement did he achieve that would then translate into Al-Hussein alayhi salam being the greatest revered personality in Shiite Islam? Let's talk about this a bit. So Al-Hussein alayhi salam, what happened to him, it was gruesome, and his family. But we have heard many things in history that are also gruesome. So why do we say that the greatest sacrifice of all time was the sacrifice of Al-Hussein rather than anyone else? And how does that fit into logic? Because if there is a greater sacrifice, then that should translate into the biggest sacrifice of all time. So Al-Hussein salamullah alayh, he was martyred, and his children and women were taken captive. Many of them died in the way. All of his male companions, except for Imam Zain Abidin and also Imam al-Baqir, he was very young at the time, maybe 3 years old or 2 years old or 4 years old, between those three. And he actually, his caravan was pillaged, and all the riches that Al-Hussein and his family had was taken. So the maximum number of martyrs that are with Karbala and surrounding Karbala, because some people weren't martyred in Karbala per se, such as the 4 messengers or 5 messengers of Al-Imam Al-Hussein, including Muslim ibn Aqil and Ibn Suhail Al-Saydawi. So many people died, but they wouldn't exceed 100. They wouldn't exceed 100. So why do we call the sacrifice of Al-Hussein the greatest sacrifice of all time? And this question is very important, because based on this question, we are able then to say why we revere Al-Hussein alayhi salam as with greater reverence than anyone else, or compared to anyone else. So the answer is as follows. When you look at a sacrifice, you don't only look at the casualties and the damage done and the property lost. That is just a minuscule part of us trying to differentiate and find what the greatest sacrifice is. Rather, and instead of that, we would actually look at what he is sacrificing for. And indeed, Islam is the thing that is most worthy of any sacrifice. It comes first in any priority list per any Muslim, whether he be Shiite, Sunni, or anything in between. And also, we would look at what he represents. And Imam al-Hussein, per the narration of the Prophet ﷺ, is a legitimate Imam. And Imam, we don't say Imam as a generalistic term that includes even those that are in the frontier of prayer and those that lead prayer, because we call them also Imam, the Imam of the prayer, Imam al-Salah. But rather, Imam was used very clearly by the Prophet in the narration to show Islamic leadership. So he, Al-Imam al-Hussein, is the one worthy with the Islamic leadership and a successor of the Prophet ﷺ, and so is Al-Imam al-Hasan. The Prophet said, Al-Hasan wal-Husaynan imaman qama aw qa'ada. Al-Hasan and Hussein are 2 Imams, whether they stand up or sit down. And standing up and sitting down is just a metaphor of waging war, like Al-Hussein did, or making truce, like Imam al-Hasan did, because they're both 2 coins, 2 faces of the same coin. So the Prophet, when he said that Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein are Imams, when he was using this term, it was very clear to the companions, the Sahaba, that he was referring to Islamic leadership, not just an imam that goes and prays, for example, as a leader of prayer, because that would not even need, it doesn't even make sense for the Prophet ﷺ to waste his breath giving such narration, because of course Imam Hassan and Hussein led prayer and were known to be, let's say, the first people to do everything that is good. So that doesn't make sense. The only thing that makes sense, especially with the understanding of the word imam at that time rather than this, it was the Islamic leadership. And he didn't say it once, he didn't say it twice, he didn't say it thrice, at least 30 times plus. So if the Prophet was so persistent in saying this narration exactly word by word, time by time, and you could return to Shiite and Sunni sources, you'd see that they all mention the same. So there is no even difference in the wording of this narration, rather a difference in the branch of narrators. Because what person A would say that person B, for example, told me that, and then person C will say that person D told me this, and it all boils down to the same narration, and this is what we call tawatur or abundance. Sorry. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم بعد. This is what we call abundance, and abundance is a word terminology in hadith science, which means that this narration was mentioned far too many times for it to be falsified, and you don't even need to look at the tree of narrators to distinguish whether it is true or whether it is false. And the reason being is the theory of probability, because abundance, there is a condition for it. It says that if a certain hadith was narrated by several people and it was the same or roughly the same in meaning or in actual wording, and those people, the different people that were narrators from different branches, let's say, of narration, they didn't actually take the hadith from each other, but each individual person took it from another person. Or it could be like that they took it from several people at the end, but it's branched, so the actual narrators, they don't know each other that well, or they are not physically in contact, or sometimes, for example, they have rivalry between them, such as some, for example, scholars from a certain school of thought and then another, and they all say the same thing, and that happens many times until the extent that we are sure and we have full certainty or almost full certainty that this hadith is true, because there is no chance, and this is the most important thing in abundance, there is no chance that all of these people would gather and actually forge up a narration that is not there and agree upon it. So it is not logically possible. So when a narration is up to that par, then it is a golden narration, an untarnished narration that you could take for understanding and pondering and acting upon without any problem whatsoever. So if the hadith was like this, then this means that Islam was meant to be led by Al-Hussein. But okay, that is good, but we didn't still get to the part in which we distinguish that Al-Hussein salamullah alayhi is truly a continuation of Islam. Let's think about the people that were present in the time of Al-Hussein salamullah alayhi. So you have two factions, two great factions in Islam. So there was the Umayyad dynasty in the Levant, that started with Abd Shams, Abu Sufyan, Muawiyah, and continued to Yazid. And there is the other Hashemite faction that started with the Prophet, then Imam Ali, then Imam Hassan, then Imam Hussein. So these are, let's say, the ringleaders. Below them, there are, let's say, levels and stratas of companions on both sides. the highest level and tier being the most knowledgeable and most loyal, and the lowest, the less knowledgeable and the less loyal. And then you have a third party that are just common folk that have no interest in the struggle between the two parties, and whoever governs them, they would accept it. And as the narration says, "همج رعاع ينعقون وراء كل ناعق," that they are just a mass crowd that follow each horn that toots. So that's the third party. So what happened is that the struggle of power and legitimacy on Islam's leadership was between those great two factions. And of course, Muawiyah has done a good job after Umar in actually having strong leadership in the Levant, even though the caliphate of Umar was still in not Saudi Arabia, let's say the Arabian Peninsula. There wasn't anything that such as Bahrain or Qatar or Saudi Arabia at that time. So it's not very accurate to say it. Anyways, so in that Arabic Peninsula, Umar had control. But when it came to the Levant, I'm talking about Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Palestine, Lebanon, these areas, and northern current day Saudi Arabia, that was under the control mostly of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan in the final years, let's say, of Umar's caliphate. So after this, you had Al-Imam Al-Hassan and Al-Imam Hussein still present throughout the time of Umar, Muawiyah, and throughout the time of Yazid. So Al-Imam Hussein was living until Yazid came, but Imam Hassan was martyred just few years before before Yazid got into power and before Muawiyah passed. And so what happened is that now you have these factions. The faction of the Umayyad family had no interest in actually preserving religion. Actually, it was the other way around. And there were many narrations regarding this showing that people actually preferred to live in the Levant because the Umayyad dynasty would take the riches from all the, let's say, the borders, the borderlining places of the Umayyad rule, and they would pour it all into Damascus and the place of rule. So generally, people that were in Damascus were very, very rich and very spoiled and very happy to have Muawiyah as a leader. But those at the outskirts, they were already enslaved and pillaged, and they had no power at all, and they resented the Umayyad rule because of that. So they created sort of a superpower that is based on colonizing what is around it. So at the end of the day, and per many narrations that were actually saying what has happened at that time, let me give you just one example. At that time, there was actually one judge, a Muslim judge, that couldn't even recite the Quran and didn't even know the rule of Islam. And prayer, for example, was something that is sort of recommended in the Levant. So there wasn't really focus on the religious ceremonies nor the prayer. Sometimes they would be prayers, sometimes they wouldn't. The people leading the prayer themselves were actually very corrupt people. So all in all, they had no interest but surviving as a ruling party, and control over Islam is the door towards that. So that is very important. The second thing is that if they had control over all areas of Islam, then they would actually have control over Islam itself. And you know, the Umayyad dynasty, for a long time, there was actually a prohibition of narrating the narrations of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And hence, when Amir al-Mu'mineen sallallahu alaihi was struck with sword, the people of the Levant said, how was he struck by sword in a mosque while we know that he didn't pray? So there was propaganda and misinformation everywhere, until people believed that the most pious person, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, didn't even pray. And you know, I don't even have to spend any minutes speaking about the worship of Al-Imam Ali alayhi salam. Zain al-Abidin, one known for prayer and continuous prayer and long age in which he prayed and cried over his father, Imam al-Hussein salamullah alayh, said also, أين أنا من عبادة علي? Where am I from the prayer of Ali ibn Abi Talib and from his worship? So it was something very well known and great, and we know it until this day. But that time, the Levant, they didn't know less about this, so no information whatsoever. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah. So, anyways, brothers and sisters, so now if we had this dynasty controlling all of Islam places and all Islamic countries at that time and areas of rule of Muslims, then as Al-Hussein said, let me remember this narration that he actually said, فعلى الإسلام السلام إن ابتلي براع مثل يزيد, that we shall say goodbye to Islam if it is going to be ruled by a person such as Yazid ibn Muawiyah. And Imam Hussein, infallible Imam, and he is saying the truest truth regarding what happened at that time and the leaders of the other faction of the struggle. So, as said by Imam al-Hussein, we wouldn't have Islam today because this will eventually happen. So, now this is the first faction. The second faction is the faction of the Hashemites, also split into three parts. So let's imagine if Imam al-Hussein did not stand up for the right of Islam and didn't say anything, let's say. What would happen then? So, if he were to be quiet, then the second level of the faction of the Hashemites, which is the companions of the Prophet, Imam Ali, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, these wouldn't actually move an inch because they wouldn't actually trespass the orders of Al-Hussein. So if Al-Hussein wanted to war, they would. If he wouldn't, they wouldn't. And we have this narration, المتقدم عنهم مارق والمتأخر عنهم زاهق, that whoever goes in front of Ahl al-Bayt and starts in decisions before returning to them, then he is doomed. And if one would be just slacking back and not performing what was ordered from him, then also he will be doomed. He or she will be doomed. So essentially, they know very well how to deal with Al-Hussein as an Imam. If he orders, we do. If he doesn't, then we are quiet. So this is the second level. The third level, you can't even depend on them because they're just common folk. They have no interest in their struggle. So essentially, if Al-Hussein were to be quiet, what would happen then? As what's happened or what is usually narrated in these nights, the first 2 nights of Muharram, and this is indeed in Bahrain the second night of Muharram. Anyways, so the messengers came to Al-Hussein in Al-Medina and also in Mecca when he went to Mecca. In Al-Medina, the first message was, pledge allegiance to Yazid or die. And then there were many occurrences to happen close to Al-Imam Al-Hussein's house. Maybe, hopefully we'll have time to talk about them later on. However, also when he went to Mecca, the safest haven for all Muslims, and as said by the Quran, Haraman Amina, it is the sacred land that is very safe. But it wasn't safe for Al-Hussein because the messengers came to him and told him that, and he got news rather than them telling him, that the order of Yazid was اقتلوا الحسين ولو كان متعلقا بأستار الكعبة, kill Al-Hussein even if he is holding on to the robes of the Kaaba. So imagine what would happen if Al-Hussein was just killed either in Mecca or in Al-Medina and then quieted and the fire of revolution was stopped. Then it is very easy to overrun all of Islam. And you might say that no, the Umayyad dynasties, at the end of the day, they claim to be Muslim, and so when they actually go forth and actually do these plans, they wouldn't actually do it. They would stop. because they know that this is sacred land. And so these are just empty threats. The answer comes in what has happened after Al Hussein, because Yazid came into rule only for 3 years. 1 year he killed Al Hussein. So this is the achievement of the year. The other year he invaded Medina and he gave it as for dibs for all of his army. So they were allowed to do anything that they wanted. And many narrations say, not Shiite narrations, rather Sunni narrations, that say that, and in that year, 1,000 ladies got pregnant without them being in wedlock, essentially raped. And let's remember the narration of the Prophet ﷺ that is mutually narrated by Shiites and Sunnis, which is that Al Medina is my sacred land. May God damn anyone that dares to tarnish Al Medina. And so Al Medina was tarnished the second year. And then the third year, Yazid ibn Muawiyah actually threw catapults on the Kaaba until it was demolished. And that is present in history. Just Google it up and you'll see all the horrific occurrences, many of which I cannot speak of. Just, very, very openly as I am speaking now. So you may research and you may see Waqa'at al-Harra and many other occurrences that are very, very, very dark and ominous. So if Al-Imam so they wouldn't actually be taken back by the fact that they are attacking the sacred land, because they also are essentially threatening someone that was a legitimate imam as decreed by the Prophet, in not only in that narration that I mentioned at the start of the talk, but rather in several narrations. There are actually some narrations in Bukhari, Muslim, for example, saying that there will come after me 12 imams, all of them from Quraysh, and that does not apply to any branch of rule that is claimed by any faction of Islam except by the Shiites. So the 12 imams of Shiites. And in some narrations he actually lists the names, so it's not something that is let's say hidden and unknown. No, it's something that is in the open. Anyhow, so Al-Imam al-Hussein, if he didn't go in a very glorious way, in a way that is heart-wrenching, then no one will even be fazed by the fact that he was killed, except for the Hashemites. And the Hashemites, they would kill most of the men there. So essentially nothing will happen, and khalas, then the Umayyad dynasty will expand and will take all areas of Islam, and then what Imam Hussein has foretold would happen exactly word by word. However, if Al Hussein showed his peacemaking, showed his intention, showed his power in over religion that is legitimized by the Prophet ﷺ, and then is taken in a gruesome way, this is when a spark will start and revolution. Indeed, that exactly is what happened. When the ladies of the Hashimis were taken into the house of rule in Damascus, they were actually faced by the men staying there, and they were the people that are very close to Yazid. And a revolution almost broke right there and then when the head of Imam Hussein was taken and struck and hit until the teeth fell out, and the ladies of the Hashemites, especially Zainab alayhi salam, the daughter of Ali ibn Abi Talib, taken hostage and not given food nor water nor safety. And so essentially, I mean, one of the reasons why Yazid, even though he killed Al-Hussein, didn't kill the ladies nor the children, even though he could have easily have done that, is the outburst and the viral movement of tears that have changed the face of the Levant. And very soon afterwards, he fell out of favor. And then, after, of course, the 3 years of rule, he died, only for his son to come and refuse the rule, Muawiyah, the son of Yazid, because his name is Muawiyah ibn Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Muawiyah, the son of Yazid, the son of Muawiyah. So this minor Muawiyah, the son of Yazid, actually was told that you must rule, so he refused and then accepted finally, and then he left the rule suddenly. So imagine that even if you are the son of Yazid, you would be contested to the extent that you would refuse this rule that was built on the blood of Al-Hussein salamullah alayhi. And this is exactly why Islam is a continuation of Al-Hussein's movement, alayhi salam. And when it comes to Al-Hussein, salamullahi alayhi, in these nights, Al-Imam Al-Hussein was actually preparing to leave Al-Kufa, Al-Medina. Not exactly in these nights, but rather uh, in the night that happened. But usually this eulogy would be recited at these days. This is what I mean. Anyways, so Al-Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam would be in the safety haven of Al-Medina until the messengers came. And then when the messengers came, Al-Imam Al-Hussein salamullah alayh told them that now you are telling me that I would be killed if I don't pledge allegiance. I won't give my pledge allegiance now. Let's gather the people so that it would be public because I am a very important person. People have to see it. And that was very smart by Imam Hussein salamullahi alayhi. And indeed, he's an infallible Imam, so all knowledgeable. And what he wanted by that is for the people to hear and revolt. So they refused then and threatened to kill him. So Al-Abbas alayhi salam entered and took Imam al-Hussein along with his, and Al-Abbas actually came with the Hashimis. So they came by sword and took Imam al-Hussein without any engagement between or skirmish between the two parties. After that, Imam al-Hussein knows that staying in Medina is no longer an option and that he doesn't want his blood to be spilt on the sacred land of Tiba or the sacred land of Al-Medina. So Al-Imam Al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi at that night decided that he will bid his family farewell, and I'm not referring to the living but rather to the martyred. So Al-Imam Al-Hussein went from his house into the house of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that housed the sacred body, and that was wall to wall to the mosque of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. People were in the mosque and they were hearing Al-Hussein weeping. And when Al-Hussein entered and saw the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Assalamu alayka ya jadda, ana farkhuka wa ibnu farkhatik." Oh, peace be upon you, O grandfather. I am your son and the son of your daughter, your dear daughter. And so Imam al-Hussein prayed Salatul Layl, the prayer of the night, next to the grave of the Prophet. And then he rested his head on the tomb of the Prophet, on the tombstone. And he cried until he wet that tombstone with his tears because he is leaving the most beloved land and the most beloved people behind, which is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa Fatima alayhi salam. And the Imam al-Hassan also alayhi salam. So he wept and cried. And after that, Al-Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi nodded into sleep on the tombstone of the Prophet. And the narrations say that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam showed up as an epiphany in Al-Hussein's dream, and he came with no turban on his head and with dust and blood covering his body, with flanks of ranks of angels to his right and to his left, crying and saying, "O Hussein, you will soon be joining us in the thereafter. You will be killed in Karbala. You will be slaughtered, your family pillaged, your family taken captive, and no one to stay and aid you against all the armies." Al-Hussein was only in the maximum narrations with 83 people, facing 70,000 fold of armies and mercenaries. So Imam al-Hussein salamullah alayh said, "O grandfather, let me come to you now." So the Prophet said, "No, O Hussein, you have a level in heavens that you shall not reach unless you are martyred. God has decreed it." So Imam al-Hussein accepted and said, "So who is the person to do the deed? Who is the person to kill me?" So he said, "You will see him and know him. His face resembles that of a dog, and he has vitiligo on his face. And when you see him, tell him that I, with all the prophets and angels of Allah, have damned him and cursed him into oblivion and into hellfire. So Al-Imam Al-Hussein Salamullahi alayhi woke up, and naturally the first thing to do is to go and gather the Hashimites, one of them being Zainab alayhi salam, telling them of his ominous fate, and telling them that these are the final nights before I pass away to the other world. So Zainab alayhi salam struck her head and said, Wadullah, oh shame that will fall upon us by you leaving. She hugged him, she kissed between his forehead, and she told him, Oh Hussein, if you are going, then I will be also going. I shall never be deviated away from you, nor shall I move one step unless you are with me, unless you are dead. And so Al-Hussein alayhi salam gathered his family and intended to leave and go into Mecca. So when he gathered them and when he left, he kept remembering his brother Al-Hassan, the Fatima al-Zahra, and also the Prophet, and weeping all in the way, starting the journey of tears. And when he left on the main road that was taking you to Mecca. And so they said, Oh Hussein, don't go to the main road, go to sub-road so that no one will stand in our way. But Imam Hussein was content and saying, my grandfather, the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, has foretold for me that I shall gain my martyrdom in Karbala. So let's move on the main path so that all could see. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم أيها المؤمنون. Condolences, my brothers and sisters. يا الله بحق الحسين وأبيه وأمه وأخيه والتسعة المعصومين من ذريته وبنيه. اقض حوائجنا، يسر أمورنا، اغفر ذنوبنا، ارحمنا وعافنا واعف عنا. Oh Allah, take us closer to you and aid us in reviving the nights of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.